You like the war? Not flavored. Might relate that flavor. Okay, thank you. Perfect. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Bloomington Committee of the Whole together, to order, Thank you very much. And there are, for many of you, there are plenty of seats if you want to have a seat. At this point, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Mathey?
Here.
Councilmember Bolin?
Here.
Councilmember Mwambwe?
Here.
Councilmember Emig?
Present.
Councilmember Painter? Here. Councilmember Carrillo? Here. Councilmember Black? Here. Councilmember Crable? Here. Councilmember Bray? Here. Mayor Renner?
Here. Thank you very much. And we're going to start with public comment. Just to clarify, public comment are policies that we don't respond, but if you do want to engage in ask questions and get direct answers, you're always welcome to the Mayor's Open House on Friday from 4:30 to 5:30 on a Friday before a regular City Council meeting, and we meet right around the fishbowl there. So at this point, we have 5 people at public comment, and then you have up to 3 minutes. Serena Fish, Kelly Dyson, and Tyler Hargis. We'll start with those 3. Thank you.
First of all, with your permission, I have a document from meeting minutes West Side Neighbors Association had. Could I pass one out?
Of course.
Thank
Yes.
you. I'm Serena Fish, and the document that you're getting is a meeting that we had with West Side community neighbors, leaders, and citizens. These are feelings, opinions, conclusions, and recommendations directly from our West Side community. What we wanted collectively is in the notes. Attending were community representatives from next door Miller Park neighbors, West Side neighbors, West Side Council, and numerous leaders of our community as listed. A copy of these minutes are also given to the task force chairman, Linda Foster. All task force members were invited to attend our meeting at a task force public meeting. Only one member of the task force attended. Our Ward 6 council member and a task force member, Ms. Carrillo, chose not to listen to us. Dr. Maya Angelou said, when a person shows you who they are, believe them. My mother always said, if you can't say something nice about someone or something, say nothing. Thank you.
Kelly Dyson, and then Tyler Hargis, and Kurt Allen, I believe. Yes, Kurt Allen. Thank you.
My name is Kelly Tyson of Bloomington. I know that support and resources for law enforcement has been a concern. Come January 1st, legalization of recreational cannabis will be in Bloomington. Our first responders will have a period of adjustment regardless of whether or not we have a recreational dispensary in Bloomington. Normal is meeting tonight. If they open a dispensary or when neighboring communities open dispensaries, people of Bloomington will buy cannabis from those facilities and consume it in Bloomington or wherever they choose. But it will still be here, and it always will. I think we should also consider how much of our law enforcement dedicates their time and resources to controlling alcohol's influences on people. Medical and illicit cannabis have been in the community for quite a while. Their effects and influences on users have proven to be exponentially less than alcohol. No police officers block off roads on the weekends to patrol cannabis. They aren't breaking up fights or making domestic violence calls because of the influences of cannabis. People aren't dying from cannabis withdrawal or making life-shattering decisions on cannabis. I'm not here to demonize alcohol. I'm here to advocate for cannabis. But seriously, think about the proven ill effects of alcohol versus the medical benefits and the rate and severity of literally any cannabis use crime. We legalized it for a reason. We know how beneficial this plant is to people. We know that those who consume it recreationally aren't out to cause harm to the community. The people of Bloomington already have access to lots and lots of cannabis. The tax revenue just isn't here. A recreational cannabis dispensary would give an amazing opportunity to those who want to purchase cannabis legally and medically without spending hundreds of dollars up front. And the tax revenue would provide so many opportunities for us to enrich our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Tyler Hargis, Kurt Allen, and Renee Nessler.
Hello, my name is Tyler Hargis. I'm a member of this community. I've been here my entire life, and I started having seizures when I was 21 years old. It's really taken a toll on my mental health and my ability to actually be able to get a job and to be able to continue to stay active at that job. I found cannabis to heal me. I worked at a dispensary that was located out in Normal. I worked at the Green Solution, and that provided me the opportunity to create a nonprofit community group known as the Central Illinois Cannabis Community, where I have done educational cannabis events. I've raised money for Wishbone Animal Rescue, Raccoon Ridge Rehab, as well as silently donated to different things in the community that help build things for our homeless, as well as other, just things to help our veterans. And now I work out at Revolution Cannabis, where now I grow it. So what I'm saying is that cannabis has provided me a second opportunity at life whenever I thought I didn't have one. And I think it can do the same thing for people all over this community if they have the ability to get new jobs at a recreational facility. Other states have examples, so whenever we keep saying these random things like there's unknown unknowns that we can't figure out to fix, how about how all the states that have already had things passed, we have examples, plenty of examples, so let's look at those. Community, I believe, is the people, right? And I'm part of your community, and I've been here, and cannabis has been in your community. And since I've had the opportunity to use cannabis and use it openly, I've done nothing but try to build our community. And I believe in the people of our community, and I don't think cannabis is going to take away their moral standard from being able to keep this place running. And to make the assumption that that would do it is silly. I also think it's silly for us to keep comparing alcohol to cannabis whenever I have a father who has been an alcoholic my entire life and is now broken down with diabetes and is currently right now as we speak in the ER, but I'm here speaking to you because this is important to me. I'm now using cannabis to heal my father from neuropathy pain all over his feet because of diabetes, and cannabis is the only thing he can take to fix that, and it's from alcohol, so why do we keep comparing the two things? We have an endocannabinoid system, which is inside of our body, meaning that we're supposed to receive cannabinoids. Alcohol is literally toxic, and it's poison, and we allow that everywhere, and that's fine. I see nothing but opportunity for people in this community to keep trying to find ways to prevent all the revenue that's going to come in to solve all these issues. Is silly. I think we keep acting like we can't solve these issues, but isn't that what a community is supposed to do? And again, I'm part of your community, so all these issues that you guys seem to keep bringing up, let me know what the issues are. Let us know what the issues are, and I am devoted to making sure that we'll solve those issues because cannabis is important to me, and I think it's going to do nothing but help us.
Thank you. Mr. Allen and Ms. Nessler.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, you've implied there's no accountability with bloggers and they're not held to any standard like other media and that they lie. Ever heard that old saying about the pot calling the kettle black? I think it fits in this situation. Our organization is well established and connected to hundreds of breaking stories covered both locally and nationally through many news agencies. Yes, our work being reported by them. If you can prove what we've published is not true, then please do so and we'll correct it. Our work is connected to over 168 criminal indictments, both state and federal, the exposure of public officials, malfeasance that resulted in the departure of public service of over 370 officials since we started. Not a bad track record for a couple of bloggers. The last meeting I came to, I urged you and the council to investigate a matter regarding a police officer no longer in your employment. Based off your radio interviews, you were, let's just say, rather loose with your allegations and downplayed the matter of the officer who was stripped of police powers, saying that he resigned. Nothing to see, nothing wrong. The city has a problem, and we're going to expose it. It would do you well to get the facts from your own people and maybe even a copy of the FOIA so you can at least be honest with the media when you go on your next propaganda tirade. Nothing to see? August 16th, quote, all effective immediately, Officer Curtis Squires has submitted his resignation from the Bloomington Police Department. So if this was just a simple resignation, maybe you can inform the public about events prior to that resignation. August 8th, 8 days earlier, quote, effective immediately, Officer Squires is on administrative leave. He is not to access any of the secured areas of the police department and has no police powers. When a police officer is placed on administrative leave and stripped of access to any secured areas of police departments and stripped of police powers, the public has a right to know why, as it is clear he can no longer be trusted by his own department. August 8th, quote, I deactivated Curtis Squires in evidence.com as a user this evening. That was from respectfully Clayton, end quote. August 9th, his access to leads has been inactivated until further notice. That was from your communications manager. August 14th, Lori, please remove Officer Curtis Squires from your list of candidates for the sergeant exam. 2 days after that, he resigns. No, sir, this was not a simple resignation. I think you know that. I asked for all complaints on this matter. Interesting, one in particular was missing from that FOIA request. A formal complaint sworn to by affidavit of Assistant Police Chief Gregory Scott dated July 3rd, 2019. That complaint led to Officer Squires being given formal notification as required by law, and his adjudicatory process was ongoing until the resignation on August 16th. I asked for all investigative records involved in that matter and was denied. Be advised, Mayor and City Council, there is no adjudication in this matter. While the process may have been started, it was not concluded. Thus, there has been no adjudication in this matter. He resigned before that could happen, and the public has a right to know the details of the officer's actions. All that aside, Mayor, why on earth would you want to imply there is nothing to see and that this is nothing but a simple resignation of an employee when in fact your own city records we have obtained to date clearly say otherwise? He was stripped of police powers. Why? The public has a right to know, as does everyone who's ever been prosecuted for a case this officer was
Sir, your
involved
time
in.
is up, please. Thank you, sir.
Please resign, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Nestler.
Good evening. I'm Renee Nestler, AFSCME staff representative for Local 699. It is with a heavy heart that we're here this evening. These words are on the behalf of Public Service Department Management and Local 699. On October 9th, 2019, the lives of the Public Service Department of Public Works were changed forever. One of our own, a valued employee and union brother, was diagnosed with an inoperable GBM, a glioblastoma. It's a brain tumor. It's a fatal and fast-growing invasive brain tumor. With no cure, the estimate 2 to 3 months of life without treatment. Earl Boynton was hired as a seasonal on June 8, 1995, becoming a full-time city employee on March 12, 1998. Earl has been a dedicated servant to the community his entire career with the city. His responsiveness to emergency situations, snow plowing, police and fire emergencies, overtime to repair streets, pick up leaves and special events for the entire community to attend, just to name a few. His response is outstanding, and he spends abundance of time of holidays, nights, and weekends away from his family and friends. Earl's heart and soul are larger than life. His wife Gina, son JC, who also works for public service, son Chris, granddaughters Lacey and Sage, and soon-to-be-born grandson are Earl's most prized possessions. After receiving the devastating news, the family of Earl's family refers to them, have been to the house every day or evening to see Earl. They're completing projects that Earl started and will not be able to finish. Earl, Gina, and their sons are selfless individuals that are always there when someone is in need. Earl has always been the first to show up and the last one to leave when helping others with projects. Please join us November 3rd at the Moose Club 614 IAA Drive from noon to 5 p.m. for a benefit to help with the expenses that will become astronomical. Donations are being accepted for silent auction and raffles. Donations are also being accepted and can be made at the Bloomington Municipal Credit Union at 602 South Gridley. We hope that you will join us, and I have some flyers for you, and we'll put some additional ones in the entryway. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Next, we move on to item 5. Actually, I guess we're flipping the order. Is that correct? We are not. We are not. We're going to go ahead and start with the presentation regarding the 2020 to 2024 Community Development Block Grant Consolidation Outreach Efforts and Funding Priorities as requested by the Community Development Department. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Gleason, who's going to turn it over to Ms. Tone.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a 5-year plan that's going to be discussed by Jennifer Toney. Are you ready, Jennifer?
Scott, never mind, I got full screen. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight and show you talk a little bit about our outreach process that we've done so far and talk about our funding priorities. This is going to be a very high level. I can send the full presentation after the meeting if you need it, but I can't start this process without sending out a huge shout out to the McLean County Regional Planning Commission staff. They have been the driving force behind our consolidated plan efforts for this next round, and despite not having had a boss since the end of July, they have kept everybody on target and kept us moving. So we're where we need to be. The next plan period begins May 1st. And it's going to be the roadmap for everything that we're going to do over the next 5 years. This just gives you a brief overview of where in the first 4 years of the current consolidated plan where our funding has typically gone to. You'll see the red line is housing, so that's where the majority of the funding goes. And then demolition and infrastructure are about even in the amount of money that we've spent. Housing rehabilitation has typically been limited to owner-occupied, and demolition is also at residential properties as a rule, because as you'll see as we go through, there's a big call for affordable housing right now, and those are 2 ways that we address the preservation and creation of new affordable housing. Last November, Council approved to adopt a new citizen participation plan, and so that is what has guided this whole process and determined what kind of outreach we did, when we did it, who we had to reach, those types of things. We started with a citizen survey, and it was a survey that included both multiple choice and open-ended questions. So it gave residents an opportunity to fill in the blanks where maybe we missed some opportunities for people to identify some needs. And through this, we were able to identify whether the resident was from Bloomington or Normal, so then we could drill down specifically for Bloomington, and Normal was able to do the same. We collected a wide variety of demographic data, and that way we were able to really look at certain priority areas based on annual income or based on tenure in the community, based on ownership or rental, and we were able to get better data from there. With our outreach, the survey was made available in paper format in English, Spanish, and French. Residents could also apply or submit online. Unfortunately, we were only able to make that available in English. We did about 30 events between Bloomington and Normal, and that was 60 hours of outreach. And we tried to target some events that would be mostly Bloomington residents, but then we also had some where the entire community would go. So that's where it helped that they were able to break down where they were from. We also had 17 drop-box locations with the surveys there. 10 of those were in Bloomington. We did some direct mailing with the survey as well as a link to the survey. We did promotions via our website, social media, through our partners, and then we also had some media coverage as well, offering the opportunity to participate. This is a document that got pulled out of the Bloomington survey. I'm not going to go over, or I'm sorry, the survey analysis tool. I'm not going to go over it in detail. The really important thing that I learned from looking at this was that when I compared these various aspects for demographics to the census data, we were on target in everything that we looked at as far as looking at our community and who we should have had, how we should have been represented. On this one, in the bottom left-hand corner is probably the most important thing, in that about 74% of our respondents are households that could be eligible for CDBG assistance. So I thought we really hit the target on that, of making sure that we were reaching the population that would best be served by the programs that we would offer. These are just some quotes that we pulled out, and as you can see, I've highlighted throughout: affordable housing, safe sanitary housing, affordable housing, accessible housing. So this was a theme that we saw over and over again, not only in the multiple choice, but especially whenever people had an opportunity to provide an open-ended answer. We also did a stakeholder survey, and I have to say we were a little disappointed in this. We sent out hundreds, or over 100 emails, and we kept following up, and at the end of the day, we got 29 responses back. And considering that I had to call our CDBG participants and ask them to even do the survey, we really had to beat the bushes on this one and get them to respond. And they'll be the ones that will probably be providing the services. They were able to choose from 4 answers as far as who they serve. They could choose Bloomington, normal, both, or neither. And the majority of the stakeholders that we contacted or that responded did serve both communities. This is just the breakdown of who they serve and what types of services. And so based on the priorities that we've selected, we're pretty much on target as well here. We did 5 focus groups. There were a total of 40 stakeholders that attended them, so we did have a little better turnout. We had providers that focus on homelessness, general housing programs, services and facilities, health, and then infrastructure. The common themes that we saw here were that the priorities are interconnected, and that by addressing the needs of one population, we can serve the needs of another. So for instance, sidewalk improvements were a high priority. And by addressing the ADA ramps through the sidewalk, we're also affecting accessibility and our residents that might have a disability. We wrapped up the outreach with a public meeting. Bloomington had their meeting at the library on July 29th. We had 36 people attend, which we were thrilled with. Typically when we've had meetings in the past, I think 3 is the most people we've ever had, and a lot of times people don't come and speak at all. So we were pleased with the turnout. It was a good mix. What the public meeting allowed us to do, it was a good way to interact with the public, and we were able to clear up a lot of questions that people had. So there were concerns about things that were or weren't asked, and so we were able to explain that the reason we didn't ask the question in that way is because it's not eligible in that way. And so the big thing that came out of that, though, is we did an allocation activity, and we gave the participants some fictional CDBG dollars to spend. They could spend $15 of it on public services because we are capped at 15%. Then the remaining $65 they could spend on non-capped activities, and the results of this were also included in our consideration for choosing our priorities. So I'm going to skip these, and I know it's a little difficult to see, but if you look at the chart on the bottom, this is the matrix that we used to look at our funding priorities. So the first 3, dependence, intent, and effectiveness, the city staff addressed those for each area, and then the Regional Planning Commission looked at all of the other outreach and scored. There were 2 publics, the stakeholder response, and one was general public, one was low-income public, and I have to be honest, without looking at, I don't remember. So through all that, we came up with this result. And so for our public services, we're looking at crime prevention and awareness, job training and workforce development. Those two are new. We didn't really have them as a high priority out of the last time. Homeless services is where a lot of our money has gone to, and we've done senior services. Other than that, everything on there is a little bit different. Then we looked at medium priorities. I didn't put low priorities up here because we won't fund anything that turned out to be a low priority. And then these are the non-public service priorities. So we're looking at accessibility improvements, affordable housing preservation, business support is new, and with CDBG that can look a variety of different ways, and so on. So with these priorities, we will start building what goes next into the consolidated plan. We do a call for grants that will start in the next couple weeks. And so anybody that is looking at programming in one of the high priority areas gets preferential points in that process. For Bloomington, they were also able to indicate any target areas. I think this was a little bit telling of where we need to target our money. For both in Bloomington West Side was the #1 answer for households that could be eligible for CDBG. But it was also one of the #1 or top 2 answers in for normal respondents. Really, there were quite a few Bloomington areas, but West Side was the main target area. So with this process, really this is here for discussion and to kind of let you know where we are, answer any questions. And then we start the call for applications. We'll put together our plan, and then we bring it back to council, I think in February, or late January, early February, and then that's when you would officially approve everything. We just wanted to get this out here now so that if there's anything, if we need to go in a different direction, I want to know up front rather than we put together a plan and come back and then maybe get redirected another way. Any questions?
Questions of Ms. Tony. Councilmember Bowman.
Yeah, I have a question. You have streets and sewers up there.
Yes.
Can you explain why that is?
What we did on the survey was we looked at activities that are eligible under CDBG, and those are both activities that are eligible. What we, on the survey, and this was something we will change next time, is HUD lists streets and sidewalks as the same type of activity. And between the open-ended comments, the focus groups, and the public meeting, it became very obvious that the citizens want them separated. So that's why streets became a high priority and sewer was more of a medium priority. Okay. I'm sorry, sidewalks was a high priority.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because those services are provided with the taxes that the city pays rather than grant money, and when I think of the HUD grant money, I think of restoration of structures like homes and that type of thing. So that's why I'm asking the question. Okay. With this, we were looking at what the citizens listed as high priorities. We don't necessarily have to put our money in those areas, but this typically in the past, we have focused mostly on sidewalks. For our infrastructure dollars. So I guess that's the feedback I'm looking for, is if we aren't going to move forward in that direction with the next consolidated plan, if that's council's direction, then we would want to know now so that we don't look at our 5-year plan at including those things. Well, the point that I'm trying to make, I guess, is, streets and sidewalks have been neglected, and we've raised taxes to address those. It's going to take time, and if you go into any neighborhood, that's going to be their #1 priority. So that's why I'm thinking, for me personally, it would be HUD money should go for homes. Get a roof over
We're a little bit limited there because we can't do new construction with HUD money, and so we're limited to rehab programs, and we would have to look at probably restructuring because we really can only do about 20 projects a year with the staff that we have right now, and we can't spend all of as much money on housing as there probably is need because we don't have the staff to do it. So that's kind of why we are limited when we do infrastructure projects. We're limited to low-mod census tracts when we do that.
Clarity.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Painter and then Matthey.
Well, first off, thank you, because this report was very thorough, and I can tell that a lot went into it. Um, my question is about the call for applications.
Mm-hmm.
What does that entail? How do you get the word out? And what's the population that generally responds to those?
Okay, so we're hoping tomorrow, hopefully I have my last admin training on some software, and so we're going to be using an online system this year. And we will do, we usually put a call for applications in the pathogram. We'll do a press release. We'll have it on our website. It'll, we'll do traditional, we'll do social media. It's typically social service providers that apply, and then they will apply for services, but they also often apply for facility improvements as well. So if they need a new ADA ramp coming into their building, we can use CDBG for that, depending on who they serve.
Right.
So that's typically who responds. With the application process, it's open. We're a little shorter this year, but it'll be open. The process will be open for about 5 weeks. Then in the past, it's kind of been up to our department to determine who we fund. We're moving away from that, and we actually will have a rubric, and we'll have hopefully city or at least non-departmental people reviewing those grants based on a standardized rubric, and then that's how we'll decide how we're going to fund those projects.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Matthey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really interesting reading this plan as it's been going through the various phases and watching how it's developing. I was reading an article, and I was trying to remember where I read it at. I don't know if it was in like an IML magazine or whatever, but there are a lot of communities that are using a portion of their CDBG funds to assist residents with getting down payments put together to purchase housing. And the way that the programs have worked, in the article I was reading, it says, it's technically a grant, but if every year that you stay in the residence you bought, a percentage of that is forgiven every year. And I didn't know if you guys I didn't see anything unless I missed it in the report, if you guys had talked about that at all.
Where was it? One of the questions on the survey, specifically, Lauren? Okay, so we did have homeowner housing assistance. The one of the issues why we haven't done down payment assistance in the past is because it's subject to that 15% cap.
Okay.
So typically we have enough requests that we haven't. It's not to say that we couldn't do it. Normal actually does offer down payment assistance. It would require a little more staff training because we need to be able to do some underwriting, and we don't have the capabilities to do that right now, but could also be a partnership out there where we might be able to partner with another organization that does.
That's something I would be interested in seeing. I talked to a lot of young people who said that they can't get out of the rental cycle because of the initial burden of trying to come up with the down payment is so difficult when such a large portion of your income is going to paying your rent every month. How are you supposed to save up to get a 10 or 15 or even a 20% down payment? So that's something I would be interested. I don't know where everybody else is on that one.
The other thing we can look at is are there other sources that the city could apply for outside of CDBG where we could offer the same type of assistance but not be under that 15% cap. So we can look at that as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It seems like if we get more people in the city who are owning their homes and taking responsibility for those properties, that's definitely a community strengthening situation right there. So
Okay.
if we can figure something out, I would love to see and would be willing to support a program like that.
Okay, we'll look into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would echo Alderman Matt for all the reasons that he said. I think it's a great idea. Maybe one of the things we could find out in terms of training would be to contact some of the people in Normal and how they got their background in underwriting as we move forward. Alderwoman Brave, did you?
I just wanted to echo those comments. I was going to ask a question similar, so thank you for answering that.
Okay.
And thank you for bringing that up, Alderman Matthey.
Thanks, Councilmember Bray and Councilmember Black.
Thank you, and thank you. To Donna's point earlier, we talk a lot about streets and sewers. I know we've used CDBG funding in the past to do some major sewer and street renovations. But the sense I'm getting from the community is that they'd like us to use it for more facade improvements, tearing down blighted structures, things that you can see.
Okay.
don't discount the fact that we have, sewers and streets are very important, but we have funding allocated towards that, and we have made significant strides in making that better. So I would like to use this money to do programs like we're talking about that are less focused on those major infrastructure projects,
Okay.
specifically around the benefit of economic development that comes from tearing down blighted buildings. I think there's a lot of benefit that comes just from looking at, as you drive down the street, you don't have to see a building with boarded up windows, and it makes a demonstrative impact to the community. They see that progress is being made. Whereas when we do a sewer project, it may run better, but that's not something that the people can see and feel. And the sense I'm getting is people want to be able to experience it a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, unless it's backed up or something. Yeah. Right. Other comments, questions of Ms. Tony? Thank you. And I do want to echo Councilmember Painter's point, and that is I think that this was obviously quite a bit, substantial work went into this. I want to thank you and your staff.
Again, I can't say enough about McLean County Regional Planning Commission. Lauren was at every single of those 30 events we did.
Yeah. Thank you again. We very much appreciate all your efforts and coming to us early in the process rather than later in the process.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we move along to a presentation and discussion by the Cannabis Task Force recommendations as presented by the City Council and a request, by the City Council. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Gleason. Did you have any words before I turn it over to Ms. Foster?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Ms. Foster.
Good evening. I want to thank the mayor and the city council members for taking a leap of faith and allow the members of this distinguished cannabis task force to elevate, educate, and to learn together about the regulations and legalization of cannabis in the state of Illinois and how it impacts municipalities. The members include John Walsh, Ann Verman, Julie Egma, Jen Carrillo, Dee Urban, Deb Carter, Gregory Scott, Jan Lancaster, Olivia Butts, co-chair, and Linda Foster, chair. This includes 2 council members, 2 law enforcement, 2 business owners, 1 addictive specialist, and 3 community representatives. Here is the history and the inception of the Cannabis Task Force based on the scope of the recommendation. The Cannabis Task Force met weekly since board members were appointed. We met at least 3 times. Timeline was too tight to delve into the zoning, taxation, and on-premise use. In order to be prepared to present for the council on tonight, these questions were our priority. Allow cannabis business establishment, opt out for now or wait and see. And as we look at allowing the cannabis business establishment, if that choice is taken, you control the narrative. You determine the time, place, the manner, the number of business, limitations, etc. If you opt out now and wait and see, then you look at other states that have already legalized cannabis that are similar to ours. We take the wait and see approach. But no one municipality has all the answers, and no one has an area exactly like ours. If you opt out permanently, then you are prohibiting any cannabis business to open or operate in Bloomington, relinquishing any tax benefits that could provide educational programs, social equity programs, revenue for the center, for the city, mental health, etc. To tackle this question, the group conducted extensive research into other states. We legalized recreational cannabis, crime, addiction, youth impact, and more. We did this by way of the internet, phone calls, speaking face-to-face, reading pamphlets, reviewing governmental documents. We also identified and discussed the various costs and benefits of each one of these approaches. We will now move on to what municipalities can decide by John Walsh.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you for having us this evening. As Linda said, can you guys hear me okay? All right. As Linda said, one of the first things that this group wanted to tackle is what is it exactly that municipalities actually are authorized in the legislation to do. And I think that this is probably not new information to a lot of you, especially as we're moving a little bit further in the process and a lot more of this information is coming out. But for the sake of public conversation, we really wanted to include that piece in it tonight. So the legislation does allow for municipalities to fully prohibit cannabis-related establishments, recreational cannabis-related establishments by opting out of allowing that. While some of the original conversations said that might go through the zoning process, it seems like a lot of the municipalities across the state are moving more into just prohibiting it in city code. Now, if the city chooses not to opt out, the two options really at that point become to allow through permitted use. That would essentially be saying a recreational cannabis establishment is a permitted use in an industrial zoning district and a warehouse and zoning district, that kind of thing. Or municipalities have the ability to allow through conditional uses, conditional zoning, which a lot of folks we're looking at as special use process. Those are familiar with that process. It goes through likely the Planning Commission. It sets up parameters that the Planning Commission then would require of those seeking a permit. At that point, that would require public notice, public comment, and that full process as well. It is worth pointing out as well that while the legislation allows municipalities to legislate essentially time, place, manner, and number through conditional use, it also strictly prohibits municipalities from prohibiting use in their jurisdictions. So essentially, it is legal for citizens to own cannabis and use cannabis legally in their jurisdiction. The legislation really just allows for municipalities to prohibit or control recreational cannabis establishments. The last piece there, strictly given to the municipalities, is to allow or prohibit on-premises use. Largely what we've been using for that is like a cigar bar or a hookah lounge, that kind of thing. That is the sort of the last thing that is strictly given to the municipalities. As far as taxation goes, it will be heavily taxed at the state level, but the legislation also allows for municipalities to establish a municipal cannabis retailer's occupation tax and can establish a tax of up to 3% on gross sales receipts in 0.25% intervals. It is also worth noting that, and something we'll get into a little bit later on the time frame side of things, is that tax will be started to be collected in September of next year, and to have that in place through the state, the municipalities have to have an ordinance or resolution submitted, passed and submitted to the state by June 1st. So once we really took a look at what is strictly given to the municipalities, what decisions and choices are given strictly to the municipalities, we took some time and tried to have a conversation on what are the benefits and costs of each of those options. And I think Olivia. Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me. So as Linda and John both mentioned, the task force kind of decided that there are three options that we see as like the three big options. There's different things within each of those that you could choose to do or not do, but I'm going to discuss some of the costs and benefits that the task force came up with for each of those three options. So the first one is opt out permanently. So that would mean you decide to opt out completely with no intention of allowing a bill later to rezone to allow cannabis, right? So some of the benefits could be reducing potential negative impact or discouraging cannabis use among youth. Some of the costs would be cannabis could be allowed without resources to combat some of those issues. So when we talk about that, we're thinking about tax revenue. We're thinking about some of that money could be used towards education, could be used towards addiction, is just some examples of how that money could be used. takes opportunities from minorities when we think about that social equity part of it, right? So we know that, most of you, I'm assuming, know that some of the things that have been written into the bill is that there are some social equity opportunities for people who have been negatively affected by cannabis in the past. This would take that opportunity from them. It also could create a barrier from patients who need cannabis but cannot get a medical card. We heard some comments during our public comment sessions at our meetings specifically about this issue, so we wanted to make sure you heard about that as well. So our second option, right, would be opt-out for now. So some of the benefits of this would be it gives us more time to think about emergency services. So when we think about our EMT folks, our fire folks, our police folks, that was something we heard during discussion, especially from our two members from the Bloomington Police Department, is that there could be some benefit in giving some time to adjust. If we also opted out for now and waited, we could observe how other communities deal with this, right? We already know there's a lot of communities, and this is included in the executive report, who have decided to allow cannabis sales in their cities or already opted out. So if we waited, we could have more time to observe some of the things that go well or go badly for them. Some of the costs, if we opt out for now, obviously, the cost would be similar to if we opt out permanently, right, but just maybe on a short-term basis. So we would lose some of the tax revenue that we could receive. The other big one, I guess, would be for opting out for now, would be some of the people who might be interested in opening a business would lose that competitive advantage because they don't get to open at the same time as other businesses in the area. So potential loss of interest for business owners, which also would affect some of those social equity applicants like I mentioned before. And then the last one is allow and regulate. So most benefits and most costs kind of in this section. So our revenue here, obviously that tax revenue, would help with whatever we wanted it to help with, right? So it could help, like I mentioned before, we could use it, for example, one of the concerns brought up by the Bloomington Police Department was it's going to cost a lot of money to test people who might get pulled over for driving while intoxicated. That could be something that we allocate that revenue towards. We also could use it for other things, right? Any public good that you might be interested in using it for, the community might see fit. Allows local businesses to have a competitive advantage, like I mentioned. If you allow businesses to open at the same time as other people in the nearby cities in the state, they would have an advantage. Obviously, an advantage is you get to regulate it however you see fit and however you feel that the community sees fit. As John mentioned, time, place, manner, and number are the four that were mentioned in the bill that specifically allow you to regulate it as you think is important. And then providing a safe and legal way for people to buy cannabis. And when we talk about that, we're talking about recreational cannabis. We're also talking about medicinal cannabis for people who might not be able to afford a medical card that could be really expensive. And then we also have some of the costs. As we know, this is a short timeline. We've had a couple weeks to do our research and present this back to you, present our preliminary findings anyway. But we have a limited time frame to prepare, unable to account for some of the pros and cons that would happen with other cities in the area, and then of course concerns about policing when we think about costs, how long it would take, and then testing methods for police as they work through these new issues. Overall, at our last meeting, we did take kind of a vote, and the Cannabis Task Force does recommend that the city allows and regulates cannabis businesses starting January 1st. I did want to mention that was not a unanimous vote. 7 members on the task force were in support and 3 members were against that recommendation. Yes, technically there was 6 at that meeting. It was 6 and 3. Linda was absent, but we took her vote into account, and it is posted as 7 to 3. And Linda's going to talk a little bit more about some of our additional recommendations.
Thank you. Additional recommendations, remaining issues, the zoning versus permits, taxation, and on-premise use. We did not have time to delve into all of those things, but those need to be considered. The task force is well positioned to lead deeper. Community engagement process is given more time. The task force can do outreach. Other community agencies, first responders, social service agencies, and other communities to get their intake. We can also look at the past practices and the input that the law has had on black and brown people, the numbers of arrests, convictions, loss of livelihood, criminalization, incarceration, you name it. It happened right here in our own community. So I don't have to like the law, but is the law fair?
And John's going to talk a little bit about some of our frequently asked questions.
Yeah, so one of the questions that was posed, I believe, by this council, and one that we heard a little bit as well, was can we opt out for now and then decide later to opt in? Our understanding of the legislation and talking with, colleagues and that is, as a home rule community, we believe that, yes, you could opt out for now, and then later you would essentially just have to amend your opt-out ordinance to then set up the zoning amendments to allow recreational cannabis establishments within your jurisdiction. As I mentioned earlier, maybe some hesitations to that. The earliest that municipalities can collect taxes is September of next year. Again, so in order to have that set in place, you would have to have the ordinance establishing the zoning parameters essentially in place by June of next year. The loss of certainty for businesses, it is a significant capital investment, is a significant time investment, and so not providing businesses that are interested in investing in Bloomington with that information that could be a deterrent for them as well, and then as well as there's been a lot of conversation in our task force meetings surrounding the loss of the potential market share if there were to wait. Now, can we opt in for now and later decide we want to opt out? I think, I'm not a lawyer, but legally this is certainly the grayest of the three. There is no language specifically discussing that in the legislation. Again, I guess theoretically, as a home rule community, you could establish zoning parameters and then later down the line then choose again to opt out. However, if you were to do that and if you were to set up legal parameters and legal framework for a cannabis establishment to come into Bloomington, you then would have really no legal basis to say that they're no longer operating unless you added some sort of amortization schedule. So really that one's pretty gray. There is some language as far as like the Naperville situation. I think that's really what kind of brought this question to the forefront, is if a location in your jurisdiction receives one of these conditional use permits and then you opt out, what has happened to that business? There is some language in there that provides 180 days for the holder of that license to look other locations in the BLS region, and then if for some reason there was not a single jurisdiction inside the BLS region that allows for recreational cannabis establishments, they can then petition to move to a different BLS region. So that one's pretty gray, but that's the best answer that we came up with for that. And then what happens if the city takes no action? Previous versions of recreational cannabis legislation had a firm opt-out date. The version that passed did not. And so essentially what most folks have been working with is that if the city takes no action, essentially you opt in for lack of a better word, but that's a little problematic as well because you don't have anything on the books that technically say it's prohibited or they're not legal businesses, but you also have no framework for a business to apply for licenses or permits or that kind of thing. So that one also puts the city in a little bit of an odd situation. So I think that I think it's been mentioned before, 3 meetings, it was pretty tight schedule, but I do think, and something that I appreciate is, the task force was established with a lot of varying views and representing different segments of our community, and so we did have a lot of thoughtful conversation. And so really we wanted just to provide an opportunity to ask any questions of the task force. So there you go.
Okay. If we have, I think we've got other than the two council members, looks like we've got quite a few of our task force members, if you'd come toward the front row, and in case there's some, especially since there are varying perspectives.
Good attendance.
Yeah. Looks like you got almost everybody here. Great. Actually, one question that I would like us to answer, which is kind of a fundamental 500-foot question that maybe we could talk to the, perhaps the law enforcement officials might be able to address, would be, regardless of what we do, whether we opt in, whatever our decisions are, aren't we going to need improved law enforcement and technology breathalyzers anyway, because people can grow it in their own homes in Bloomington? They could drive through Bloomington. They could get it in normal. Isn't that a law enforcement cost we're going to have anyway?
So, yes, is a short answer. There's just not really a tool that law enforcement can use at this point to test for cannabis, similar to a breathalyzer test. There's some tools being developed and tested in Michigan that will, it's kind of a swab thing to see what your cannabis level is. As far as locally, there's nothing that's passed a FRI hearing that we'd be able to present as a court. There's a couple different types of courses you can go through, one of which being a drug recognition expert. Looked into that a little bit. The first available class to get anybody from our agency into would be in April of next year. It's a 2-week course with some more follow-up for certification. So there's just not a good answer for how we're going to address these things. There are already a few tests in place during SFSTs, the field sobriety testing, but what ends up happening is if we feel that you're under the influence of drugs, you'd have to go to the hospital, have blood work done. The department pays for the blood work up front, and if they're convicted at court, that can be wrapped up into their agreement that they pay back those funds to the department. So if they came back negative, or for whatever reason there was a plea deal or something worked out where they weren't pleading guilty, then we wouldn't get those funds returned to us.
Thank you so much. Other questions? Let's see, Councilmember Black.
Thank you, and thank you everybody who's participated. Yes, thank
Oh,
you.
oh, we should do, well, oh, I was going to do that at the end.
Thank you. I know. So I guess my question's more for a Tim or a Jeff, or Jeff's not here, so George. So I guess what are you looking from the council from here? What are the next steps? We've received a report. What is the direction you're seeking from us?
I guess the biggest thing that we're looking for is a general thumbs up or a thumbs down regarding next week's council meeting. Would place on the agenda a resolution to start the zoning process. And why that would be required is if we were to hit the January 1st deadline that allows for zoning to have a public hearing, also provide a recommendation, and then that allows us a short window of a city council meeting in December to vote yes or no.
So when you say start the zoning process, does that mean that the zoning board would be taking public feedback and producing recommendations and making and giving us some written rules or procedures around cannabis in Bloomington?
Yes, that would be the start of that process, and that's only if the majority of the council sees that January 1st, 2020 date is significant. We can take as long as we want as well, but really, to answer your question, Alderman Black, is I'm sitting back to sort of gauge what I'm hearing from council, whether I'm going to bring that as an agenda item next week or not.
Thank you again. So I guess then the question becomes, suppose that next week we determine that we'd like to start the zoning process. Does that lock us into any final decision?
No, not at all. In fact, as you gather more information, again, this has been a very short, tight window for this cannabis task force. If you learn more information, decide that that's not the course that you want to take at this time, we undo what is potentially done on October 28th.
Thank you.
Other questions, council members? Councilmember Painter.
In Colorado, Governor John Hickenlooper talked about edible cannabis and how it exploded, and it was a real problem. And they actually scaled back edibles to where it can't look like animals, fruits, or people. And I'd like to take it one step further in our community, if we could. I'd like to make sure that all edibles taste like medicine because, you know, everybody says, well, no parent in their right mind would give their kids edibles, but there are parents who aren't in their right minds. They leave loaded guns laying around the house, too. You know, and kids have gotten into edibles, and they've had psychotic experiences, and no, it hasn't killed them, but it's not been a good thing. So is it within our ability to say, oh, you know, we have to have edibles that don't taste like candy? I understand some people have COPD and they need them, but I don't think they have to look like candy or taste like it. So is there some way that we can draw the line on that? Is that legal for us to do so?
Mr. Boyle?
There are a number of things that are still pending with regard to the act, but I would say that generally speaking, we can't have something that is stricter than the state regulations. So I would tend to answer that as no.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. When Colorado rolled out its legalization in 2014, they also enacted the country's first state-level banking system to service cannabis corporations. What kind of work has Illinois done in that regard?
Could you say that last part, please?
What has Illinois done in regard to having a state-level banking system to service cannabis companies?
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
You could look into that if you'd like, but I mean, in terms of the act, I'm not sure that that addresses it. I don't think it does.
Okay, and I have another question. Where the money comes from is where the money goes. The bill, as I've read it, says that 49% of investment does not have to be local. Can we mandate for any local dispensary to have 100% Illinois investment? Because I'm thinking of things like the, you know, Chicago parking meter debacle, where they thought they were getting an American company to come in, and it was some holding group from Abu Dhabi that had a name like the All-American Parking System, and they, well, you've been to Chicago recently and tried to park there. It's incredibly expensive.
Are you asking if the city of Bloomington can do that, or the state of Illinois?
Both.
I don't think the city of Bloomington can do that. I would say, in fact, I'm certain that we couldn't direct something with respect to the state funds. You know, the state allows us to do that limited tax, and to pass a level within that from 0 up to what the maximum tax is for the retailer's occupation tax. But we don't have authority to be directing.
And John, did you want to
things like
add to that?
Yeah, so I just go back to that the legislation really, in a 600-page bill, there's really about a page and a half that really allows, it specifically tells municipalities what they have authority over as far as local ordinances. Both, I think, the shapes of the edibles, that and the investment levels, to me that is more of a license question, which then that's the state jurisdiction there. The municipalities have no jurisdiction over which licenses get approved or get designated.
Okay, so we only have control over where they go and
Distance is a huge thing. Distance requirements, time of day that they can operate. But again, it does come back to the legislation is also pretty clear. You cannot be unnecessarily more strict than the state law that passed.
Okay. And if we were to opt in, we would be able to levy a 3% excise tax, and would we get all of that 3% excess tax back to our municipality?
Yeah, quick clarification. There is an excise tax at the state level. This would not be an excise tax. This would be like an occupation tax. So really just for the ability to operate in the city of Bloomington. And there is some specifics there as far as what the municipality sees back. I don't know that off the top of my head, but you can tax up to the 3% in the 0.25% intervals.
Mr.
Okay,
Boyle,
so
before we go for that, Mr. Boyle, do you know the answer to that Councilmember Painter's question? Yes.
we get the 3%, plus we also have a 2.5% sales tax on top of Illinois'.
Correct.
So is it safe to assume that we would get 5.5% back to our municipality?
I think we've got a few
would
members of the commission that are nodding yes. And
I believe so. The other thing as well is the state, that when they set up their allocation piece, I believe 2% actually gets put into a local government distribution fund that then gets funneled back into local governments as well, with the intent that it goes to community education, law enforcement training, that kind of thing. But now that is 2% across the entire state.
But I thought that came out of their 6.25%.
Yeah.
Right, but we would get to keep 5.5?
So I believe, yes, you get to keep 5.5. It doesn't come out of that 6.25. That's the state sales tax. That would fall under there are different taxation levels of cannabis for the state. There's different, it's actually scalable. Illinois is kind of unique. There's different tax rates on different contents of THC, and there's a different tax rate for edibles actually as well.
Okay, so you're telling me that we wouldn't get the full 5.5%?
That's not what I'm saying. No. Yeah,
Okay.
I believe, yes, I believe that you would get the entire 3% municipal retailer occupation tax as well as your 2.5% that you have at the local sales level.
Yeah, because that's really all I would count on. I really wouldn't count on the state of Illinois to give us anything extra on top of that. I just wouldn't count on it, but okay. All right, well, thank you.
Let's see, Councilmember Milawamwe and then Bray.
Okay. So my question is for Tim, and then I have some follow-ups, so if you would allow me. What would the zoning process entail? In other words, what sort of expertise would we bring to bear in that process?
Well, we try to provide assistance to the zoning board as they prep for their public hearing, as much expertise as we can find out there. Again, very short amount of time to try to pull that together to satisfy the requirements of the public hearing.
Okay. So I would assume we'd have legal, some financial, or tax perspective as we're talking about. It seems like there's a little bit of confusion. Nobody's really sure.
Yeah, and not to dodge the question by any means, but we really would try to provide as much expertise, available at the public hearing as we possibly could, and to the zoning board.
Okay. All right. Okay. Because that is one question that I do have in terms of what would the possible benefits be financially for the municipality. I'm still not sure that it's going to be the bonanza that people are predicting it's going to be, and I know each community is different. I've read just this morning an article about Canada, which is different, but things haven't necessarily panned out in the way they had expected that it would. There's actually not as much consumption as people thought there would be. So in that sense, trying to understand, the financial picture, the financial benefits for the municipality, I'd like to, to get more information on that, particularly when you're talking about such heavy taxation. My hunch is that the black market will still be alive. And true, some people may say yes, but on the black market, it's not a guarantee. The stuff is not going to be as good or whatever it is. But yet, I could see if somebody has a trusted partner in the black market, then that's who they're going to go to instead of going to the legitimate market. So those are all things that I have questions about, and really not. I mean, I'm not a. I like to look at things from an objective standpoint. So I'm not an obstructionist, yes or no kind of person. I want to see the whole picture, so I know. Like I said before, I want to go into it with my eyes wide open, so I can make a good, solid decision for folks in the community. And on the idea of expertise that we would bring to bear, I think I think it adds even more legitimacy to the process if we're able to do that, particularly given the fact that I think my experience, with the council is that people don't always listen. The community doesn't always listen until we get really close. So there are some people who listen, who are tuned into it, but others are not. So when they do, I think when they decide to, I think it's going to be important to have that, that sort of expertise available. Thank you.
And I just wanted to mention, too, we did provide you with a full report, and there is a section in there about tax revenue, and I believe it was Deb who did a lot of research, like into different cities in states that have legalized, and talked about some of the tax revenue, and she actually looked into how many people live in that city, what the average income is in those for the people that live in those cities. So they're kind of somewhat comparable, something that you could take a look at. But I think some of the pros and cons that we mentioned was just like using that tax revenue in certain ways, but making sure that we know cannabis is going to be here, whether it's sold wherever it's sold, but trying to do some positive things with that tax revenue.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I skimmed through the report because I got it this afternoon.
It's big.
Right?
It's big.
So,
and to your point about being objective, everyone from the task force, and as you saw, right, people had differing opinions on our task force. Everyone submitted their research to that report, and it's all in there. We just posted it. All the links are listed. It's separated by category, so I think you'll hopefully be able to find what you're looking for. If not, maybe 15 articles that you can look into that specifically talk about tax revenue in certain cities across the U.S.
Thank you. Councilman, yes.
I just was going to respond additionally to the question and the comments made previously. Regardless of this very tough decision that's before this council, exactly what we're talking about tonight, as city staff and you guys as our elected officials, this is a mad dash for us to figure out what we are doing, parallel but separate from what you guys are considering tonight, because this does become effective January 1st. So the impacts on public safety, whether it's going to be police, fire, EMS, that day's coming. And then also the considerations related to our public employees, all the human resource type of considerations. This is a 600-plus page document, as we've talked about before. It's a tough read. At times it looks like things were cut and pasted into this, just to get agreement and to get something that was approved. So it's, in addition to what you guys have to consider, it's one that we're working, as quickly as we possibly can, because January 1st is going to be here very soon.
And that's regardless of what we do.
Yes.
Actually, Alderwoman Ray was next to the queue, but you said you had an immediate response?
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question about what sort of expertise you have in mind as you're naming what expertise we bring to bear. I just want to make sure that I'm clear in understanding what sort of expertise you're thinking of. I mean, echoing some of what Olivia already said, the report includes comparisons to other cities and includes what other Illinois cities have or suburbs have opted in or out. But I just want some clarity on what it is that you'd be looking for.
Yeah,
in the
so
zoning process.
a couple of the things that I'm looking for is one, the legal expertise, right? Because we are in Illinois, and we want to hear from our staff, what their understanding of the law is, and as you could tell today, through Alderwoman Painter's questions, there are still some unanswered questions. So that would be it will be interesting to know. But there's also the taxation piece. I'd like to hear from someone who understands what exactly we are supposed to get, because it seems like we kind of struggled with trying to answer a couple of the questions on taxation. So I don't think that's quite settled yet. But also there's zoning. I want to hear from the folks who work on zoning every single day, because I don't have that expertise, and that's who we rely upon to try to understand some of those things. So that's just a few, but I'm sure there's more. Public safety is another thing. Although we have a couple of folks who participate in the task force, but I'm sure, particularly when you're talking about, again, adding more legitimacy to the process, there will be people who will tune in 2-3 weeks before and would want to hear that information.
Okay. Alderwoman Bray, thank you.
So it strikes me that as a collective team here, as the City Council, we'll need to work together to try to figure out what all our questions are and get those questions answered by the experts, be they legal experts, be they our city staff, and the like. I want to talk a little bit about what we're looking at here today and thank those citizens that served on the task force. I know it's tough to step forward and fit the time that's required into doing the work. I watched you. I came to each and every task force meeting. So I do have some questions about your process. As I observed, I guess it was meeting 3 in which you had a conversation and shared your perspectives. It was my observation that you spent 22 minutes talking to one another about your votes or your perspectives, but up to that time I had never seen any consensus discussion or sharing of information at all. So and again, that was 9 people were present that night, so the 22 minutes with 9 people, you spent 3 minutes or less discussing your perspective. I didn't see a lot of interplay. Where did that interplay occur? Because I'm not really understanding what happened here. Being a person, again, that attended all 3 meetings, I really didn't see these things and concepts emerge from your work together in that public space. So where did it occur? How did it occur? Can you explain it?
So absolutely. So we took kind of a straw poll that first meeting. It wasn't super informative, but I think that the first meeting, a lot of folks came with a lot of questions, more than answers. I think over the course of the next couple meetings, we shared our resources with each other. I think everything from what other communities are doing to what communities in Illinois are looking like, other ordinances in Illinois that have passed, whether opting out or passed zoning amendments, that kind of stuff. I personally do think, again, with such a, kind of a compressed time frame and a lot of information to get through, I think a lot of folks weren't necessarily ready to give that position until the third meeting. And I think, but by that time, I do think that there was a lot of information available. And again, not necessarily conversations outside of meeting or anything like that, but I think a lot of folks really dug deep and did a lot of homework on their own and came with their opinions. And I think, just like the general public, I think a lot of folks had a gut feeling of where they were before the task force meeting started, but I think it took until that third meeting to kind of be ready or willing to put that on paper.
Thank you for sharing that. So we've talked a little bit about the perspectives represented on the task force in the past, and certainly various folks have different perspectives, and they bring them with them where they go. But just a couple questions about what perspectives were and were not represented, or what you did or did not do. As Alderman Mellon Bobway has mentioned, there was not a lawyer on the task force, was there? No lawyer. You didn't have anyone from Unit 5 or District 87 on your task force, or anyone from the university community, did you?
We did not, but I would say, with all due respect, we didn't make the makeup of the task force. You all did.
Pardon me?
I would say, with all due respect, the makeup of the task force was not on the task force. That was by the city council.
Yeah, right. So you weren't charged with putting together your own task force. Yeah, fair. So as I think about that, I think about, we have a result here that was very predictable. We had a lot of transparency going into this. We knew that Alderwoman Carrillo favors this initiative, and it's my understanding that she created the report that we're looking at today with the assistance of the co-chair. Is that correct?
The report that you all have today, the large report?
Our report
like 30
that we
pages?
received, yes.
Yeah, that was research from everyone, compiled by, I would say mostly by the chair, the vice chair, and Jen helped as well.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So as I think about what our task is as city council members, I think we need to do our due diligence. I know many of you, as I have been out in the community and meeting with various stakeholder groups. And just today, Alderwoman Bolin and I met with Unit 5 School Superintendent Mark Daniels and his staff to talk about impacts on youth. Now, I noticed you have that in your slide, but can you talk a little bit more about what youth take rates are below 21, and did anyone do any research on that?
I believe there is a section in the report that talks about youth, cannabis influence in youth from other states and cities. We split up research based on question. I know you were at that second meeting, and we kind of discussed all the questions we had. Everyone took a couple questions. That was not something I've researched personally, so I would reach out to anyone else on the task force here who
want to add anything? Deb, if you'd come forward, Deb.
Deb, yeah, come on up.
Sorry. Well, we need you for the record. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I think there is something that does address the youth, especially in Colorado. The youth, as far as my understanding and why I did not look critically into that, there is youth and treatment after cannabis has become legal recreationally in the other cities in the report. But as far as a subsection addressing youth itself, it's classically that the youth, the drug of choice is cannabis for youth 16 to 18 or 14 to 18 to 21. It was my understanding, though, when we were assigned the task force and the different components that we were looking at was this is a recreational 21-year-old legal recreational drug that we were looking at. That is something that should be looked at in greater detail, absolutely, but it was a subsection of something that we did look at.
Are you aware that both the school superintendents in District 87 and in Unit 5 disfavor moving forward with recreational sales?
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware that Chestnut Health Systems put out a report mentioning that when regular use is initiated in the teen years of the cannabis product, it can lead to an 8-point drop in IQ, and there's a permanent effect
Yes, I'm
on
aware
the young
of
brain.
what cannabis does to an adolescent mind. I again would bring it back to the task at hand, that I thought the task at hand was to look at the recreational dispensary possibilities in our city, which would be 21 years old.
Right. So your focus was on adult
Yes.
use, and so you're focusing in on that.
But there is a
And-
subsection of the youth, yes.
So with your focus being that, and what we're focused on is overall what's good for the whole community, not just adult users,
Absolutely.
right? So, okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Had you also heard, I was surprised to see this, and I have this paperwork to hand out to all city council members tonight before you leave. I'll give you a copy of this fact sheet that was shared with us today at the Unified offices from the BN Parents Group and Chestnut Health Systems. Their findings about marijuana use during the teen years is strongly correlated with schizophrenia, anxiety, and depression. Had you heard this?
I know that cannabis use is self-medicating, and it does correlate with co-occurring disorders such as depression and other mental health disorders. And that was one of the things that we looked at, was if council does pass, and we do have something here, the money that we would be getting back as far as the tax reparations could go to education and treatment, because some of the very important adolescent programs that we have had, prevention, early usage, have been cut. And for example, Chestnut no longer has inpatient adolescent treatment. Here, you have to go downstate for it. So there are very legitimate places that some of that money could go to address that.
Yeah, and
But
you
if I
mentioned
could-
you
if
didn't
I
do
could-
any
could
studies
clarify-
with the...
Yeah, if I could clarify, though, what the two of you said. It's correlated, but what you're saying is self-medicating, so that doesn't mean there's any cause and effect necessarily?
No.
No cause and effect by
But
using...
Thank you for that, Mayor, because there is some statistics. Some of the statisticians are saying that this is another reason why a wait-and-see approach is advisable to communities, because the data is being created as we speak. In time, there's going to be some
It's
data
in real
points
time,
that
absolutely.
are being correlated, especially since California went legal in January 2018. And so if we wait just a little bit longer, we're going to have more data and more statistics to inform our choices, inform this information. One other question about the youth. I guess I was just so surprised when I read this particular comment today about the teen's brain being primed for learning, but addiction is a learned behavior. And I know you're an addiction specialist, so that's why I wanted to ask you this question. It says that there are 90% of addictions have roots in the... Sorry.
I'm going to defer to Linda.
Oh, okay. This is an addiction question. It says 90% of addictions are rooted in the teen years, and it takes the teen only months to develop a full-blown addiction, whereas it could take an adult years. And I wondered if the addiction specialist had an opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm not an addiction specialist, but
Deb, did you want to say anything on that before? Okay.
I want to focus on the task at hand, in which we were directed to do. And it sounds as though that you have been able to have conversations with others in this regard, in which this is not new facts. This fact has been around for a while, and we have not addressed it. So for tonight, for the task committee, we would like to defer that to the city council to delve deeper into finding out what the correct direction should be in this regard. So we just want to make sure that what we provided here tonight was what you asked for. We did the studies, we did the research, we did as much as we could for the 3 weeks that we had, and for the time, whether it's 22 minutes or not, for the time that we had, we try to do the best that we could. So please accept that in which it was given. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. And I guess that's why, again, I say to this council that there's due diligence to be done here that rests on our shoulders. that we need to schedule in conversations and work groups within the city council to take up some of these issues. With the report coming so late in the day, I didn't have an opportunity to completely look it over, but I don't know who on the task force created the section about the cities and what cities are opting in and out. Who did that piece?
Before we go any further, though, since we've gone over, can we have a motion to continue this, since we've got several people for another 15 minutes? Moved by Alderman Craybill. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Painter. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Matthey?
Yes.
Councilmember Bolin? Councilmember Mwambwe? Councilmember Emig?
Yes.
Councilmember Painter?
Yes.
Councilmember Carrillo?
Yes.
Councilmember Black?
Yes.
Councilmember Crable?
Yes.
Councilmember Ray?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. No,
So my question was, I wanted some information about that list, those lists I was looking at, and what that's supposed to represent, because the statistics out there are that almost 80% of cities and towns are opting out / not going to participate in recreational sales, but yet your report seems to indicate a much closer ratio. So could you explain the thinking and what you've included in this report for us to review?
Yeah, absolutely. So I put together sort of the general out and, for lack of a better word, not out or in lists. The way that we did that was, and I believe that we're still a little early in that process. I think that really the only way at this point to figure out if a community has opted out or not is essentially to look at if they've passed an ordinance opting out or if they've passed an ordinance establishing a taxation rate or, you know, the zoning code. What I did for that was just scoured all the news sources I could find. I reached out to all my colleagues in the sort of the Chamber of Commerce world. I reached out, and specifically in that one, we were really focusing on central Illinois communities. And so there's a lot of, we attempted to do central Illinois communities for that one. But like I said, personally, I believe that a lot of communities are really right where you all are right now, which is, sorry.
Thank you for that. But in fact, for those that have taken action, almost 70% have opted out. For those who made, rather, over 70% have opted out. Have you seen that statistic anywhere? Because I sure have.
I've seen it. I've heard of it. Yeah, for me, what I was operating with was really just concrete, findable legislation, either way, either opt out or setting up some sort of taxation or.
And you don't think that creates a false impression that almost as many are staying in as are opting out in the manner in which you included in your report? You didn't think that?
So I would maybe challenge. I do think if there are a lot that weren't included, I would have a hard time accepting that, I guess, because I did spend quite a little bit of time finding those with, again, like I said, concrete, either ordinances out or ordinances setting up some sort of. Now, there might be conversations in those communities, but as far as concrete legislation either way, I don't think there are that many more.
Well, I'll just throw you out a couple names here. We've got Rays Lake, we've got Marion, two cities just popped in my head when I started looking. There are some other cities a little farther north, but there's a long list. It's out there. It was just curious to me when I looked at your report. That was the nature of my question.
If we could move along here.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the other thing is that we, it's certainly not unexpected that the cities that are the most anti-marijuana are going to opt out first. So we'll find out more by the end of the year which cities opt in or opt out. But so rather than listing the cities, I think in the interest of time,
Thank you for that. So I guess what I hear you saying is really that list is not representative of really the landscape right now, and the fact that over 70% have opted out, that have taken it up. It's just kind of you're putting some cities on the page for us to just consider or think about. Is that the qualifier we have?
Yeah, to the best of our ability, finding, again, with a focus on communities in central Illinois, and as close as we can get to central Illinois. I know there are a few out there that are on that list that were more of the extremes, both north and south. But again, as far as what we could find, very concrete legislation for either way, that I think that was a list to the best of our ability at this time.
Well, I look forward to reading the entire report. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Alderman Matthey and then Black, and Oh, you've been on for a while. Okay. Well, I did have Matthew, Black, and Carrillo.
Thank you. Again, thank you to all the task force members for the work that you put into this. We asked you to do a lot in a short amount of time, and we really do appreciate everything that you have done. Just a couple things I wanted to touch on, just for clarity. I know that we talked a little bit about edibles earlier. The packaging and how edibles are presented and to make sure that they're not made appealing to or aimed at children, that's already addressed in this bill. Is that correct? I mean, that was like a specific goal that they had. They called out an entire section of how and where and what packaging and labeling should look like.
Yep, I believe so. Like I said earlier, I believe that's more of a state decision than local, though, yeah.
Okay. What page is it? I don't know.
We can find that. We can find that. Alderman Matthew. Yeah. Alderman Matthew.
And then one of the things I wanted, so we've all been reading a ton of articles and research that's coming out, from every different community and every different state. Tim, I appreciated one of the things, he stepped out for a second, that he said earlier that about the impact that this is going to have on our local businesses, because I know that I am already in the process of modifying my employee handbooks and processes and stuff to deal with it, because it's going to be legal in the state of Illinois. It's going to be in Bloomington no matter what we do. It's already going to be here. So as a business owner, I have to adjust and modify my processes to understand how to deal with that. And I appreciate the fact that the bill allows businesses to continue to have ownership over how they can deal with it and regulate it within their businesses. If you want to have a zero tolerance policy, you can continue to do so. So I appreciate that, and the Chamber's work in trying to get out in front of the business community to say, are you looking at this? How are you dealing with this? Because I think that's important, because it's going to be here January 1st, right? There's nothing we can do to stop that at this point. I just wanted to say, one of the articles I was reading, something to you, Mboka, you were talking about the black market comments earlier, and that's been really interesting. There's a lot of articles that are written about that, in that it's one of the things I found interesting is that the state of California has, I think it was 80% plus of communities in California have opted out, and California also has the worst black market for marijuana going right now, because you can buy it legally in every one of their major metropolises, and then people are just driving it back to their own communities and sell it there. So it's just an interesting statistic to see how opting out has worked for California in an adverse way. And Alderman Bray, thank you for your reaching out to the school boards and talking to them and getting their perspectives. I think that we are all in agreement that we don't want alcohol, tobacco, or gambling for 21-year-olds, and we certainly don't want cannabis for anybody under 21 as well. And so I think that recognizing the impact of how this is going to affect the youth and community is important, but I don't think that there's anybody anywhere that's advocating that we should allow cannabis sales to those kids. The fact of the matter is that it's already here, and it's already a problem, and it has been a problem that we've been working on addressing for decades at this point. One of the comments I got, and this is a funny, weird anecdote, but one of the comments I got was 500,000 people at Woodstock and not a single fist fight, right? So it's just an interesting perspective on things. Yeah, but I just think that it's, from my perspective, it's already here. It's been in Bloomington for as long as I've been in Bloomington. It's going to be legal to have in the state of Illinois, and it's going to be legal to possess. We are going to have police departments and fire departments and emergency services that are going to have to deal with it any way, shape, or form. I still am going to advocate for, I would like some of the resources to deal with this problem, right? If we're talking about youth services, We're talking about emergency services and prevention, and whatever we can do, we're going to need the resources in place. So I appreciate the fact that you've provided a ton of links in there. I don't know that I've ever read so many articles on one particular subject in such a short period of time in my life. But it's been an interesting journey, and thank you all for your help as we go along through this.
Great. Alderman Black, and then Carrillo, and Crable.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not sure anything I'm going to say is going to change anybody's opinion this evening, but I want to provide some clarification to staff. But first, I wanted to highlight something that Maboka said that made me laugh, where he referred to what sounded like a weed dealer as a trusted advisor. I've never heard.
Your black market weed dealer, trusted advisor.
That is the best euphemism I've heard in a long time. So at least I'm hearing your comments correctly. So that gave me a smirk. So thank you. Yeah, so I just want to provide staff the direction because we can legislate tonight, people's feedback about marijuana. And once again, the state has dropped this on us out of nowhere. It's an unfunded mandate, whether we like it or not, because we could be talking about economic development, we could be talking about our water supply, talking about O'Neill Pool, but instead here we are talking about marijuana because the state of Illinois dropped it on us. From where I sit, what I'd like to see next week would be it sounds like we need to have two resolutions prepared. I think one being that we opt out entirely, and if that ends the question, I don't want to have people's wheels spinning if the majority of this council decides that we want to opt out. The second one I would say is that we have to go through the zoning process. Am I correct on that? No matter what.
Yeah, the resolution would be to start the zoning process through the planning commission.
So so we'll go through planning and then zoning and then back to us, right? Okay.
Well, if we opt out, there won't really be anything to zone.
Correct. So one resolution being opt out entirely, so we're not wasting anybody's time, but a second resolution with sending it to planning to zoning to go through that process. And that's the one I want to advocate for to see next week. I think the task force has done a yeoman's job here for 3 weeks of work. I got the report today, so I got to be honest, I haven't deep dived it. What I'd like to see, though, I think that from where I sit, the work is concluded. We have a report. I'd like to see maybe one more meeting with you guys where maybe the minutes are approved, that gets added on to the report, and then we formally receive it. But we're really at a point in time where I want to make sure people can provide the feedback that they're looking to give. And I think that comes through the planning and zoning process. I can say that just from the feedback that I've gotten, it's probably about 6-1 in favor. The folks who are opposed are very opposed, and the folks who are in favor are very in favor. And I think it's going to be a close vote up here. I don't know which way it's going to fall. But I think it behooves us, at least from where I sit, that we go through the zoning and planning process. Now, I don't know if that's going to have majority support, but I'd like to see what that looks like. For me, I'm looking at this problem. I take all of the social justice, the studies, the medical effects, and just put it to the side because I can't control any of that. What I can do is look at it as this is a question of whether or not we can regulate a business in a specific area. And I think of it like alcohol. And we have a model for a process that if there are issues at an establishment, that there can be formal complaints documented and then action taken, in some cases losing a liquor license after due process is met. And I would imagine something very similar for marijuana regulation, because frankly, if a neighborhood doesn't care that an establishment ends up in their area, then why should I? But I want to make sure that residents and business owners have the opportunity through a formalized process to weigh in and say yes or no. But I don't know what that looks like until it goes through planning or zoning. And so, again, not sure that's even going to have support, but my perspective is that I'd like to see what that looks like so I can make a determination. We are under the gun here by January 1st, so I wanted to thank staff, too, because I sent over a bunch of questions last week, and I would encourage all of us that if we have questions that we do it, maybe that we do an extra meeting for planning to, a special meeting just for this topic where we can invite experts and everybody can weigh in and provide their feedback. But what I wanted to point out on here is that there was
Before you go any further, just it looks like Mr. Boyle wanted to say something. It seems like the first thing that you had would not be a resolution, would be an ordinance. If we have an opt-out on an ordinance, and then we would have a resolution if the ordinance does not pass, then to send something to planning and zoning, go through the zoning planning process. Is that correct, Mr. Boyle?
That's right. I mean, if you choose to go in that order, that would be the order to go.
I think that's what
Because otherwise, there is nothing to zone.
logical.
Right.
What Alderman Black is saying is that
that makes sense.
you make one determination. If you doesn't lock you in, but if you say no, then there's no need to go through the planning zoning process.
I don't care how it falls out. At the end of the day, I think we just need to make a decision on whether or not the majority wants to continue this conversation or not. And if that's the case, if we do it, I've seen ones where we have 2 sample ordinances come through, and then we pick one and make that motion. We're ready for both. There we go. That's my opinion. So hopefully that gives you the clarification that you're looking for. Again, I encourage everyone to write their questions down. And one of the things I really wanted to highlight, because I think there's been a lot of feedback that's been given anecdotally, and as part of any zoning planning process, I think we need to, and I say we, I mean staff, probably through administration, sends a formal letter out to Wesleyan, Unit 5, District 87, Chamber of Commerce, every one of, and there's a whole list of them on here, and I probably missed a few, soliciting feedback. And I want it in writing, and I want to be able to review it before any final decision is made, because I've heard some kind of off-the-cuff comments from folks and some feedback that's off the record, but I think this is a big question that deserves, in my opinion, to be put on the record. So I would hope that if we were to move forward next week with that ordinance, that we would include that direction to staff.
Okay, and at this point, since we have gone over, again, we still have quite a few people here. I'm going to say 10 minutes if we could be as expeditious as possible. Is there a motion to extend comment another 10 minutes? Moved by Councilmember Emig, seconded by Councilmember Craybill. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Mathey?
Yes.
Councilmember Bolin?
Yes.
Councilmember Mwambwe? Councilmember Emig?
Yes.
Councilmember Painter?
Yes.
Councilmember Carrillo?
Yes.
Councilmember Black?
Yes.
Councilmember Crable?
Yes.
Councilmember Bray?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Carrillo.
So first of all, thank you so much for that presentation. Really appreciate it. And as a member of this body, I do want to apologize for the way that the members of this task force have been treated today. I think that there have been some accusations that this body did not operate with integrity or transparency, and that there were intentional attempts to mislead the council in the report. As somebody who has worked closely with all of you, I know that that wasn't the case, and I really respect and honor the work and feel really affirmed by this process that we put together. You know, when I brought the proposal to the table, I said, you know, we come to better conversations and better conclusions when we have more people at the table, and I do think that was a very diverse group of folks from a lot of different walks of lives who brought their expertise. I also, you know, I asked the clarifying question about expertise because while I do think that we do have legal experts, we call them lawyers, and people who are experts in zoning, there is a type of expertise that is also brought by these community members. Linda Foster, as head of the NAACP and a person who has worked alongside communities of color to see the way that they have been devastated by the war on drugs, brings expertise to the table. Olivia Butts, as a member of Black Lives Matter, who also has you know, bailed people out of our own jail, sometimes for cannabis-related offenses, brings expertise to the table, as does Jan Lancaster for being a business owner, and Dee Urban for being a business owner, and Deb Carter, and our police officers who served on the task force. So I do not want to see that expertise be dismissed. I also, you know, I guess I've been called out for being transparent in my position about this, but you know, I'm not embarrassed about that. I think that this has been a substance that people have been using for all time, and there are many, many documented benefits, and regardless of what our personal opinion is about it, the state has already made a decision that this is going to be a legal substance in the state of Illinois. And so, yeah, I don't mind operating with transparency. That it's something that I'd like to see people engage in safely, legally, and in a way that that continues to keep the brand of our community. And yeah, I feel disheartened by by the tenor of this conversation, which has not been very transparent. But I do want to say that it's 2019, and I think the public is with us on this. So I have gotten, just a flood of emails, phone calls, people who have spoken in support of this. And if somebody wouldn't mind clicking the next on the slide, I do have a visual. I shared with other members of the council a set of petitions that were put together and shared. And today I went through those and filtered out any zip codes that were not local zip codes. So that included 61701, 61704, and 61705. And 94% of people supported us allowing the use of cannabis, the sale of cannabis in the city of Bloomington. So that was close to 300 people as compared to 23 people who signed the petition opposing. This is very much the ratio that I have been seeing in my inbox and in my phone calls. And for all the conversations that we're having about the effects on youth, we have not had enough conversations about what the effect of the war on drugs has been on countless youth of color. So yes, I'm concerned about IQ, but I'm also concerned about what has happened to countless and countless families who have had a member taken away because they're using a substance that is very minimally harmful. And so like I said, I think the public, as well as many of the members of the task force, understand that it's 2019, and we cannot reasonably, we can't turn a blind eye to the carceral state. And this is an opportunity for reparation. This is an opportunity to be on the right side of history, to acknowledge a messed up past, to acknowledge that the entire reason that cannabis is an illicit substance is rooted in racism, is rooted in the association of this substance to Mexicans, to Mexican immigrants. That's why we call it marijuana, right? Which is why you will not hear me say that. I will talk about cannabis, right? Because cannabis was an accepted substance until people decided to go on a fear-mongering putting out propaganda about what this is about, that it made black people listen to jazz music and forget their place in society, that it made Mexican people rape and kill white women, that it made well-to-do middle-class white kids listen to records and do violent things. This is not the case. It's 2019, and I just think that we are going to sound like the people who were advocating for prohibition, and we are going to be on the wrong side of history if we don't start to reground this conversation in what it is, and it's a social justice issue. It's an equity issue, and it's an issue about people's right to determine what is good for them, with a lot of added benefits. So I'll just conclude by saying, regardless of your personal opinion, I don't ask that you share it with me, but council members, I do ask that you think about the fact that cannabis is, as Councilmember Matthews said, cannabis is in our community, has been in our community, will continue to be in our community. It will now be legal, and I, for one, would like to have the regulation to have some say and some oversight into how it takes place. And I would like to see us have the resources to combat whatever issues already exist and whatever issues are going to come up.
Just to clarify, and this is, obviously we're talking, I'm not doubting any of the statistics, but you're going to tend to have bias in self-reporting. We did do at Illinois Wesleyan what we call a systematic stratified survey 3 years ago, almost exactly this week, just prior to the presidential election, and it was almost exactly like all of our surveys in recent years. It was a pretty good microcosm of the city. It also had the presidential preference in the city almost exactly on the money as it actually occurred. And at that point, I don't know what the percentage would be today, but there was a 16-point margin. It was 53 to 37% in favor of legalization then. I don't know what it would be today. Again, obviously that's 3 years. But at this point, Councilmember Craybill and Councilmember Bolin. And then Councilmember Bray.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of random points and questions. Johnny, it's section 5521, but I'll send it to you.
No, I got it.
You got it? Okay, excellent. Very good.
Already?
Beat me to it. All right.
I'm about 1/6 through.
Also, I think one of the things that hasn't been mentioned, that there's a lot in this bill with regard to limitations on advertising and the regulation of actually they track it from when it's a seed until it's sold. There's a lot of requirements for education in the state bill and keeping it away from schools and churches. And I think, if I remember reading it right, in an application for a community, they have to say whether it will have a detrimental impact on the community. That's what the applicant has to answer. And do we know how many establishments Bloomington could have in this new law?
One.
Okay.
And there's no guarantee we'll get one.
Right.
It's just we either have one or none. Right. What?
Have you read the law?
Oh, because the normal might relocate here. Okay, so it could be 0 to 2. Okay. 0 to
5 years. I
Well, I'm talking about now.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'm sorry.
And then could we possibly limit establishments or limit dispensaries to social equity applicants? Is that something that we could do as a city?
Mr. Boyle?
Into that, honestly, I can't say for sure. I'd have to check.
Okay.
And I think there's a gray area in the law on that.
Well, excuse me. Anything else?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry. Did you have a specific?
I was just going to say, from what I understand, those social equity applicants would get preference. It's not that they would get limited, so they would get additional points.
I think in the state, you mean, because the state makes this decision.
Right, and I mean, that's one of my reasons for hesitating on it, is that the state really does a lot of the licensing and takes the social equity into account at that area. So I'm not certain that that's something we can do. I know there's an awful lot of preemption in the bill with respect to those.
I would just quickly mention, they get an added a leg up on their points. I think it's about 20% of the points that you can earn throughout your application from the state. You just get a leg up if you're in an affected area or have been affected by it in the past.
Thank you very much.
So if we had, for instance, 5 applicants that were approved for this area, one of them being a social equity applicant, would we be able to pick that applicant?
We have
No.
absolutely no choice whatsoever in
Okay.
this is all done in Springfield.
And then, and again, just to make sure I understand, what we may be voting on next week, and it goes to what Scott said, is to send it forth to our zoning and planning, and we could later make a decision to opt out.
Correct. What staff's prepared for is if that January 1st, 2020 date is important to this council, and that's proving that is what keeps us on track.
But regardless, you're still going to have, there's still things that you have to do, just like as Jamie was talking about as a business owner. We're going to have to do whether we opt in or opt out.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, we have 2 people. Are they very quick, or do I need some more time? Okay. Why don't we go ahead?
Okay.
Let's just go ahead and
I'll
have
make a
another 10
motion that
minutes.
we add more 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Matthey, second by Black. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Matthey.
Yes.
Councilmember Bolin. Councilmember Mobley. Councilmember Emig.
Yes.
Councilmember Painter.
Yes.
Councilmember Black.
Yes.
Councilmember Crable.
Yes.
Councilmember Bray.
Yes.
Okay. And Donna, you had the floor.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that the report was very thorough, and I appreciate that, but I have not been able to read it. So in that sense, I don't think I'm going to be ready to vote on up or down next week. That's just me. But going forward with the zoning, if it does not affect the opt-in or opt-out, I would favor that. And I just would like to share that I'm kind of disappointed that the town, the city, and the county did not have a conversation. I'm not saying that they should act the same or respond the same to the issue, but that the conversation did not happen.
Just to say, we did, not with the county, because the county is not making a decision, but normal, and I know the city managers and the mayors have, and I believe at least several city council members have.
But not the council.
I think some members of the council have had conversations, with informal conversations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. There's still so many questions regarding the law. There's still amendments coming through with the November legislative session. I still don't think that there's a rush to meet a January 1st deadline. So again, we can move forward with the zoning. I think that's important. Those are important decisions because also depending on what the zoning turns out to look like might affect my decision as whether or not to vote up or down. So I don't want to do the thumbs up or down yet. That's my perspective.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Councilmember, well, you haven't spoken yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then we'll go back to the people who have.
Okay. Thank you. And I also just want to thank the task force for their diligence and illumination. For me, it was an opportunity to just get more context and perspective and information. I have read more articles on cannabis than I ever thought I would, many of which were brought to my attention by the task force. I want to just make a recommendation to the rest of you that I made to the task force. There is a report from the Colorado Justice Department that I think is relatively even-handed, and in it they follow the trajectory of use of youth and have found that while, yes, undeniably there is a statistical correlation between use in youth and negative impact, that correlation exists. What they have not found is that in states where cannabis has become legal, that there is increased use. If anything, it dipped a little bit. But you can check the data yourselves because everyone should have a right to interpret the information. And just today I pulled something from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIH. Daily, past month, past year, and lifetime marijuana use declined among 8th graders and remains unchanged among 10th and 12th graders compared to 5 years ago, despite the changing state marijuana laws during this time period. And I'm happy to provide this information to the council. And if I can summarize, I think going forward, it does make sense to look at both ordinances, and I appreciate the work that city staff has done to prepare those. I think that considering this in light of potential zoning will influence whether or not we want to go forward or how we can go forward as a body. And that another recommendation I have is that Senator Steens has published a municipal toolkit that you can use to access. Maybe you've already found it. Donna will send it to you. That can be really helpful. And always invite, I like Alderman Black's idea to ask for testimony from community organizations. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Councilmember Bray, and then Councilmember Craybill and Carrillo. And I think that's going to have to be it because we have 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So just weighing in on Councilmember Black's process here and just checking in. I'm just concerned that we don't have all the data points and all the information I'd like to have before having a vote on opting out or staying in, because I think the zoning piece is so important. Because in listening to the task force and attending all of their meetings and appreciating them as members of our community with whom I can disagree in an open space and ask questions about the merits of their position in a friendly manner, I have to submit that there's a lot of questions about how we can actually regulate this. And we really, it doesn't look like alcohol. It doesn't smell like alcohol, and it's not going to look like alcohol as far as how we can zone it and regulate it for bad actors or bad things that are happening at locations. And I just don't want to be that council member that gets a call one day from a constituent that says there's a bad thing happening at that particular location for cannabis, and what are you going to do about it? And I say, call the state, and the inspector will get down here in about 90 days or 6 months, and then they'll do a report to the commission, and then the commission will take a look, and maybe we'll get a resolution in a year. I mean, if that's what that's going to look like from a zoning perspective, I think that's really going to color how we would vote up or down. So I would respectfully say that we just explore the zoning, and then let's put it all together, and then maybe even look at the November changes, and then let's make a decision after we have more data.
Okay.
Just briefly describe where we're at in terms of the legal department. We've looked, well, first of all, you may remember from when we started the zoning process a couple years ago, when we did the most recent text amendment. The resolution had a draft amendment with it of language. So we're thinking at this point, and we've looked at a number of ordinances from various cities that have dealt with the dispensaries and the business establishments through the zoning ordinance, through the special use mechanism. And that would be the system for policing it. There are various standards and so on that we may present to the council as options. And
but it sounds like Georgia, what we're just, as we're trying to wrap up, it does sound though like all we're really looking for here then is probably, does anybody, before we finish, George, does anybody object to us just focusing on zoning? Because it sounds like some people would like some information on zoning before they make their final decision. Okay. Now, George, if you'd finish that as quickly as possible, because we're almost out of time.
We would just encourage people to get a hold of us with their ideas and their thoughts that might be able to guide us in some initial language that would start the process. We don't have to end the process with the language we start with, but we'd like to, provide something.
And that's what we can talk about next week.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Craybill, and then Councilmember Carrillo, and we're done.
I would be remiss if I didn't thank all the members of the task force, and I didn't do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Carrillo.
Yeah, thank you. Another round of applause for you all.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'll join that. Thank you for your work. And especially on such a tight deadline. Thank you so much, John, and everybody. And, several, I think almost all 9 of you, we lost Jan, and Jan left. But anyway, thank you all so much again. Okay, at this point, we have a city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. There is absolutely no agenda items next week. That was a joke. And there will be. The resolution to bring forward to start the zoning process with the Plan Commission. And then also an item last week that was tabled on the consent agenda, 7D. I have additional information on that I'll share with Council. And it was just basically me getting some questions answered that I had that started with some of the aldermanic questions, and that will be back in the consent agenda as well. Other than that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, do I have a motion to, we don't have any executive session. Okay, I didn't think so here. At this point, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Wow, we had several people. Moved by Alderman Carrillo, council member, excuse me, Carrillo. Is there a second? Well, you just wanted to get out of here. Is there a second? I was going to say, motion couldn't die of a second. Second by Councilmember Black. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you.